This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 603, entitled Masculism as Therapy for Bitter, Lonely, Monoconscious Feminists. Description. This flyer claims that it is actually therapeutic for monoconscious feminists to convert themselves to becoming biconscious feminists, because they would then become much nicer towards men, because they would lose their misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi bitchiness towards men that monoconscious feminism teaches, or rather misteaches them. Having a man in their lives will make them happier. This is the carrot approach of the Masculists towards monoconscious feminists. The Masculists also use the stick approach, which is the targeting of the monoconscious male feminist boyfriends of these monoconscious feminists, teaching these boyfriends masculist ideas, so that these newly minted biconscious boyfriends then see the monoconsciousness of their feminist girlfriends as hypocritical and bigoted, become disgusted with them and dump them. This combined masculist approach, that is of carrot and stick, to convert monoconscious feminists to biconsciousness is more effective than either approach alone. Now the flyer itself. Masculism as Therapy for Bitter, Lonely, Monoconscious Feminists by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I was watching a feminist video on YouTube and was struck by how bitter and at a deep emotional level how lonely the woman was who made the video. This got me thinking. There are millions of women like her in Western countries who have grown up with feminist ideas that preach to them that gender oppression is a one-way street, that women are the oppressed and men are the oppressors, and give women lots of examples of this. For example, rape, men's sexual harassment, men's domestic violence, etc. After a lifetime of this feminist indoctrination, it's not surprising that millions of women grow up with a misandrist view of men, seeing men as gender political oppressors, so they feel fully justified in hating men for the many ways that men oppress women. But this feminist hatred of men comes at a price, a heavy price, since 99.5% of women are heterosexual. So even the most rabid of feminazis is still dependent on men for their sex. So if these hetero-feminists are sexing with men, they must feel emotionally hypocritical, since they are, in a manner of speaking, fraternizing with the enemy. That is, accepting having penises in them for their sexual pleasure, but these men are the ideological enemy. There are deeper reasons why women suffer when they hate men, and that is that women evolved to be dependent on men. In ancient times, women could not hunt, not fight, not plough, so depended on men to do these things for women. So a woman in the distant past who was unable to attract the interest and support of a man was in a distinctly disadvantageous position relative to a woman who did have a man in her life. Women evolved to feel miserable if they did not have a man to support them, since their very physical survival and that of their children often depended on having a man around who could take care of her in terms of providing male-hunted meat and male protection against wild animals, against male warriors of enemy tribes, and even against raping men of her own tribe. So given the above, it's not surprising that in Western countries there are now millions of miserable, lonely, monoconscious feminists who are manless and childless, due largely to what feminism teaches them, that is, to hate men. Millions of women have absorbed these ideas, and as a result they have made themselves miserable, that is, manless, loveless, often sexless, childless, and lonely. To masculists, this is just dumb and unnecessary, since all that women, that is these miserable, lonely, bitter, monoconscious feminists, have to do to pull themselves out of their misery is to learn a bit of masculism, so that they become biconscious, that is, they become aware that gender oppression is a two-way street, that is, that women oppress men too. Biconscious masculists don't deny that men oppress women. Biconscious masculists are just as capable of reading feminist books as are feminists, so are well informed as to how men oppress women. The essential difference between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists is that the latter have been taught by masculism how women oppress men, and in fact worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, which makes them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. For example, to masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is seen as being rather small beer in comparison with the big three ways that women oppress men for decades, that is, women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fatherhood. Anyone who examines these big three becomes conscious how horrific they are as gender crimes against men, and learns to hate those women who commit these massive gender crimes against men. Thus, biconscious masculists see monoconscious feminists as hypocrites, since these feminists are lashing out at men for the ways that men oppress women, but say nothing about how women oppress men, and in fact, worse. This is not surprising, since feminism, in all its monoconscious myopia, says nothing to women about how women oppress men. So since most women are not original thinkers, in brackets, women have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes, it does not occur to women to think that women oppress men too, when they never hear of such ideas coming from society, from the media, from their friends, etc. For nearly all women, all their lives, they have been exposed to only a very biased, monoconscious view of gender politics, that is, that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed. Masculists see monoconscious feminism as a deeply misandrist, gynocentric ideology that teaches women nothing about how women oppress men, and for this reason, masculists despise monoconscious feminists and punish them severely by effectively exterminating them. Slowly, by forcing them to rot on the shelf, by totally avoiding them, not even pumping and dumping them. So that these women die slow, miserable deaths, manless, sexless, loveless, childless, and feel utterly rejected by men, which makes these women feel depressed at a deep emotional level. Of course, to masculists, there's a simple solution to this problem that monoconscious feminists face, and that is to convert monoconscious feminists into biconscious feminists. That is, by teaching these feminists masculist ideas and values, so that these women see that gender oppression is indeed a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men worse. For example, the big three mentioned above. Why do masculists claim that biconscious feminists are on the whole happier than monoconscious feminists, and that in fact learning masculist ideas for a monoconscious feminist is actually therapeutic for her? Because by becoming biconscious, she loses her monoconscious feminazi bitchiness and hatred towards men for the ways that men oppress women. Because once she has become biconscious, she is, by definition, aware how women oppress men. So she learns some female masculist anger at women for committing massive gender crimes against men that last decades, that are truly horrible and should be hated by both sexes, by anyone who has any sense of gender injustice, in either direction, male against female and female against male. A biconscious feminist thus loses her feminazi bitchiness towards men, because if not, then she would feel hypocritical in her gender politics. That is, she would be accepting the hypocritical idea that it's okay for women, for feminists, to lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women, But it's not okay for men, for masculists, to lash out at women for the ways that women oppress men. And in fact worse than vice versa, given that women's gender crimes against men last decades and hence are far more serious than vice versa. Thus biconscious feminists are much less feminazi bitchy and hence are much nicer to be with for men. So not surprisingly, such women are much more likely to have boyfriends. Men don't want relationships with women who are misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunts and avoid them totally. Which is why in today's world there are so many bitter, lonely, monoconscious feminists who are rotting on the shelf, manless and childless, who feel that life has passed them by, which of course it has. They are middle-aged, manless, childless, depressed, and often on antidepressant drugs. A third of middle-aged women find themselves in this category, thus a major social problem. So, as millions of monoconscious feminists are exposed to masculist ideas, they will become biconscious and hence become much less feminazi bitchy towards men and hence be more likely to have a boyfriend, to be loved and sexed and hence be a lot happier. Thus it seems reasonable to claim that by biconsciousing themselves, monoconscious feminists go through a therapeutic process that turns them into much happier women, since they are having more of their deep emotional and sexual needs met by having a man in their lives, that when they were monoconscious they were not having due to their monoconscious misandrist bitchiness that monoconscious feminism taught them, or rather mistaught them. Masculists are political animals. They are out to change society so that it is a lot fairer to men. So masculists claim that it is in masculist self-interest to teach women biconsciousness so that millions of women will support masculists in the men-fairing of the gender laws. For example, in reforming the divorce laws, legislating the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, and the OPTAB, O-P-T-A-B, obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births to block women's paternity fraud, setting up GECs, GECs, gender equality committees in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally for the fipping of women, so eliminate women's man's slavery, etc. Masculists see clearly that it's in their self-interest to have millions of women who are female masculists who join forces with masculists to vote for the men-fairing of the gender laws. But masculists don't just rely on the carrot approach to persuade monoconscious feminists to become biconscious, that is, enticing monoconscious feminists with a greater level of happiness if they convert themselves to biconsciousness. Masculists also use the stick approach by telling monoconscious feminists that if they don't become biconscious, they will be hit by the masculist stick in the sense of losing their currently monoconscious male feminist boyfriends. Since the masculists are actively targeting these male feminist boyfriends, teaching them masculist ideas so that these boyfriends become biconscious. The longer their monoconscious feminist girlfriends remain monoconscious, the more hypocritical they will seem to these now biconscious boyfriends, who will now see the monoconscious attitudes of their feminist girlfriends as hypocritical and bigoted. These biconscious boyfriends will then become increasingly disgusted with their monoconscious feminist girlfriends and will dump them in their millions, causing a lot of pain amongst women, motivating millions of monoconscious feminists to rethink their gender politics so that millions of them become motivated to teach themselves masculism so that they can avoid the risk that with their next boyfriend that he doesn't do the same to her as her previous boyfriend, that is, dump her for being a monoconscious misandrist feminazi cunt who deserves to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spat at. So masculists apply the carrot and the stick to monoconscious feminists to motivate them to become biconscious. and then to help men to mend fair the gender laws so that men can be liberated from the many ways that women oppress men, and for decades. Women are half the voting population, so if Masculists can persuade millions of biconscious women to vote with men, then the gender laws will change to improve the quality of men's lives, which after all is what Masculism is all about. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 600 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.